When we think of ancient civilizations, Egypt often stands at the forefront, a beacon of early human achievement along the Nile. However, the perception that Egypt was the first or sole cradle of civilization in Africa doesn't capture the full picture. In reality, Egypt was one of the later cultures to emerge along the Nile, building upon the rich legacies of societies that preceded it. In this video, we will reveal a detailed history of pre-dynastic Egypt, a topic seldom shown in documentaries about Egypt or deliberately less talked about by Western historians. So why is so much known about Egypt? Egypt's prominence in history is not because it led ancient African societies, but because it was among the first to record its achievements in stone. These enduring monuments and hieroglyphics have survived millennia, preserving Egypt's legacy and distinguishing it from other African societies along the Nile, whose contributions have been less visible due to the perishable nature of their records. Groundbreaking discoveries in Kemetic, ancient Egyptian studies, have sparked a complete re-evaluation of the timeline for pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods. These findings challenge long-held beliefs and suggest that key events in Kemet's history occurred much earlier than previously thought. Based on carbon-14 dating, Egypt's first dynasty dates back to around 3400 BCE. Supporting this, a 1987 study led by Herbert Haas introduced astonishing carbon dating results. Analyzing organic samples from the pyramids, these tests suggested revising traditional chronologies by 374 years, aligning closely with the estimates of scholars like James Mellart, who dated the first dynasty to 3440 BCE. This is a slap in the face of Western scholars who have been on a recent crusade to elevate Mesopotamia over ancient Egypt. Also, this rethinking doesn't end with dynastic Egypt. Earlier periods, such as the Badarian, Amratian, that is the first Naqada phase, and Gurzian, that is the second Naqada phase, have also been pushed further into antiquity. A 1985 study by archaeologist Fekri Hassan revised the Badarian period to begin as early as 5535 BCE, marking a 2,000-year journey of agricultural and cultural development before Egypt's political unification under the legendary Narmer or Menes. The implications are immense. A longer timeline not only deepens our understanding of how Kemet evolved, but also suggests a more prolonged and complex interaction with neighboring cultures. 3 early rulers buried at Abydos, Narmer, Ka, also called Sekhen, and Ra, or Irihor, have been identified through artifacts bearing their names or symbols. These artifacts, along with materials linked to another ruler, the Scorpion King, are similar to those from Egypt's first dynasty, but are distinct enough to be categorized separately. Scholars place these materials in a transitional phase called Dynasty 0, which predates the formal establishment of Egypt's first dynasty. Archaeological evidence shows that this transitional period, often referred to as Naqada Phase 3b, is part of a timeline that bridges the late pre-dynastic era and the early dynastic period. This phase includes the development of early royal symbols and artifacts, such as serex, a reference to early royal insignias, which began appearing even before unified monarchy was established in Egypt by Narmer. Additionally, archaeological finds in Nubia reveal connections to Egypt during these early periods. Artifacts such as pottery and decorative motifs found in both regions suggest that Nubia and Egypt influenced each other during this formative time. Early Kemetic texts from the second and third dynasties reference their origins as being from the beginning of the Nile, that is Tanger, where the god Hapi dwells, at the foothills of the Mountains of the Moon. The exact identity of the Mountain of the Moon is debated among historians and scholars. However, many connect it to the Rwenzori Mountains, located near the border of modern-day Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Rwenzori Range, often shrouded in mist and clouds, fits the mystical description of a moonlit or cloud-covered mountain and lies close to one of the major sources of the Nile, the White Nile. Herodotus and later classical writers, such as Ptolemy, also referred to the Mountains of the Moon when discussing the Nile's origins, lending further credence to the Rwenzori connection. So, to truly understand the roots of Egyptian civilization, we must look southward to the headwaters of the Nile in regions like Ethiopia, Uganda, Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania. Ancient Egyptians themselves acknowledged this heritage. Before the term Egypt was ever coined, the people referred to their land as Kemet or Tameri. Ta-Seti, a Nubian state corresponding to modern-day Sudan, was a significant cultural and political entity long before the rise of the pharaohs we are familiar with today. So why isn't Nubia widely recognized in mainstream history? Much of this oversight stems from the influence of ancient Greek historians, whose accounts have heavily shaped our understanding of African history. Greek scholars often began their narratives with dynastic Egypt, overlooking the civilizations that laid the groundwork for its emergence. This Eurocentric perspective has been perpetuated in modern education. Many explorers and historians traditionally start in Cairo and move upstream to Aswan, tracing Egypt's history in reverse chronological order. However, to truly grasp the flow of cultural influence, we should start at the Nile's source and move downstream, following the path that ancient peoples would have taken as they migrated and traded. No society in human history has started at the mouth of a river and worked its way against the current. However, in the case of ancient Egypt, Western historians expect as to believe that this civilization started at the mouth of the Nile, that is the delta. It wasn't until around 1500 BCE, during the powerful reign of Egypt's 18th dynasty, that Egypt began to assert its dominance over regions to the south, including Aswan, which historically had been part of Nubia. This expansion marked a significant turning point in Egyptian-Nubian relations, as Egypt shifted from coexisting with its southern neighbor to exerting direct control over key Nubian territories. The 18th dynasty, often regarded as the height of Egypt's imperial power, was characterized by ambitious rulers such as Thutmose I, Hatshepsut, and Thutmose III, who sought to expand Egypt's borders both to the north and south. Aswan, situated at the first cataract of the Nile, served as a borderland between Egypt and Nubia at this time. Prior to this, what we now consider southern Egypt was Nubian territory. Therefore, when we discuss Nubia, we are essentially speaking about the foundations upon which dynastic Egypt was built. Moreover, Nubia's influence persisted even during Egypt's dynastic periods. Nubian rulers and culture played significant roles in Egypt's history, especially during times when Egypt's power waned and Nubian pharaohs ascended the throne. The early pharaohs, such as Narmer and Aha, who are often credited with unifying Egypt, have ties that trace back to Nubia. Greek historians named Menes, or Narmer, as the first pharaoh, but it's important to recognize figures like Aha, who introduced Nubian cultural practices to Egypt. Some deities worshipped in Nubia, like Mandulis, were later integrated into Egyptian religious systems, although Western scholars have often downplayed these connections. Temples like Kalabsha, ancient Talmis, stand as testaments to these shared histories. Adorned with carvings and inscriptions that depict African animals and symbols unique to the Nubian region, these sites offer glimpses into a past where the lines between Egypt and Nubia were fluid and cultural exchange was abundant. These artifacts are invaluable in understanding the full scope of influence that Nubian civilization had on Egypt. In all of Egypt, there's no place like Aswan, a territory controlled by Nubia up until the conquest of Thutmose III, when it comes to sourcing marble. The quarries of Nubia supplied the magnificent stones that built Egypt's grand structures. No marble was imported from foreign lands because Nubia had everything the ancient builders needed. For those wondering, Europe, at that time, wasn't even a footnote in history. The Opet festival celebrated in ancient Egypt had its origins in Nubian traditions. This festival celebrated the goddess Mut, not to be confused with the more commonly known goddess Nut. Goddess Mut was revered as the Mother Queen, part of the first trinity in the Nile Valley's spiritual system. While Goddess Nut receives ample attention in historical writings, Goddess Mut's significance is often overshadowed, despite her clear association with the southern regions of the Nile. African civilizations, particularly along the Nile, thrived with abundant resources. Unlike colder regions where survival was a constant struggle, Africans had time to observe the universe, develop sophisticated calendars, and understand the natural world deeply. They knew the Earth wasn't flat long before others speculated about it. Their achievements, such as the stellar calendar and the pyramids, demonstrate advanced knowledge and spiritual beliefs that predate many modern religions. Ancient Egypt, for instance, drew its gods and traditions from the south. Nubia. Temples like those at Karnak and Luxor were oriented to honor these origins, reflecting the southern roots of their culture. Even monumental figures like Amenhotep and Akhenaten connected their reforms to these foundational ideas. At the heart of ancient Egyptian spirituality lies the mystery system, a complex philosophical framework that scholars like Professor George G.M. James explored in works like Stolen Legacy. It was rooted in science and mathematics, the tools that ancient Africans used to understand the universe. For the ancient Africans, mastering mathematics meant mastering spirituality. Their scientific explorations were deeply intertwined with their understanding of the divine. They saw no separation between the laws of physics and the principles of religion. Concepts like balance, harmony, and justice were not abstract ideals, but were represented through tangible symbols like the feather of Maat and the scales weighing the heart, as depicted in the so-called Book of the Dead. One of the most intriguing artifacts is the Turin Papyrus, a record written during the reign of Ramesses II and now preserved in the Royal Museum of Turin, Italy, hence the name. The author of this papyrus has, however, been lost to history. Discovered in poor condition by Jean-François Champollion, the founder of modern Egyptology, the papyrus lists all the kings of ancient Kemet. While parts are missing, what remains reveals remarkable claims of time and space. The document mentions the Shemsu-Hor, or followers of Horus, who are said to have reigned for 13,420 years before Narmer, the first pharaoh of unified Kemet. Before them, it lists the venerables of Memphis and the venerables of the north, whose combined reigns lasted an additional 23,200 years. Altogether, this timeline extends Egyptian history back 42,000 years. However, the kings before the Shemsu-Hor are often named after deities, such as Osiris and Maat, leaving scholars to debate whether these figures are historical or mythological. Interestingly, the Egyptian historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, provides a similar account. He attributes 9,777 years to the reign of the Shemsu-Hor, and 15,500 years to their predecessors, suggesting a total history of 30,000 years for Kemetic history. These accounts challenge European narratives, painting a picture of a civilization whose roots run far deeper than traditionally acknowledged. Could it be that Egyptian civilization began tens of thousands of years earlier than we thought? Recognizing this interconnectedness allows us to honor the true origins of Egypt's grandeur and the foundational contributions of Nubia and other African societies. Until the lions have their own historians, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.